I'd like to call to order the Capital Improvement Committee meeting of December 22nd?
Third.
December 23rd at 2:02 PM. Matt had sent us out a email this morning with a little Excel spreadsheet with a list of items on there.
I didn't, I was out this morning, so I couldn't email, but I was in my car.
Yeah.
I don't have a copy of it.
Yeah. Well,
I think I can make you one quick. Does anybody else need one?
I need one too, sir.
Anyone else, Mr. Chairman?
No.
I'm just gonna sit here. I think it's gonna make it easier.
All right, well, we don't have any backup information on this, but I see you compiled this, Matt, on fiscal year 2022. We have a total of $2.4 million of requested items. Capital list that we moved forward was just under 600,000. We need to figure out how we're going to prioritize the projects.
Yeah, if I may.
Yes.
So this spreadsheet represents the final requests of all the department heads. We had a preliminary from last time. There are quite a few changes, things that were either stricken or added, and priorities changed. And you'll note, and I think it's helpful, that the fire department went out a couple extra years to just call attention.
Oh, heck, then.
Hello, mate.
This is why we don't use Zoom.
Oh, we just got hacked?
Pat will have it in a minute.
Pat's taking care of it.
All set?
Pat's taking care of it on his end.
Yeah.
That's going on here.
Is that you, Shirley?
Yeah. What's going on?
Nah, there's some technical difficulties. Pat's taking care of it.
Okay.
Happens from time to time,
Really? This is WebEx or Zoom?
Zoom.
Zoom. Joe Biden's up, huh?
Joe Biden, hey, Joe.
Yo, what up? Don't pay attention to the man behind the curtain.
This may be more.
All right, you got it, Pat?
Somebody.
We got a lot of folks coming in right now. They were just pouring in, so I'm trying to keep up with them.
You mean by cable, by email to Zoom?
Yeah. All right,
Yeah,
Matt.
Zoom bombers are coming in trying to make a mess of things, but I
Okay.
just booted a lot of them.
Looks like we're clear for a moment. Go ahead, Matt.
There's a lot of chats in there. You want to read them out loud? Not. You know, it may not be worth it, Pat, at the end of the day.
Yeah, I'm gonna look at closing down the room. I don't know if you guys have anyone else that need to get in, but they can maybe email me.
Well, we get Shirley on. We got to get Shirley in somehow. Sure, but Shirley, you know how to use Avaya, right?
No, Lisa sets it up for us.
Oh, she does?
Shirley, you want to call in? You want me to call you and just put you on speaker?
Here,
No.
I locked the meeting, so no one should be able to get in from here on out.
All
All
right,
right.
thanks.
Thanks, Pat.
Sorry about that.
Okay. It happens.
Okay, Matt's going to continue.
Before we were so rudely interrupted by America's Future, I was pointing out that we had a couple extra years here from the fire department, but what it does is it calls attention to a couple of future thoughts that need to be part of the conversation because they inform what we should be thinking about before we get to that point. So in the back of your mind, within the time horizon, the most expensive vehicle we have is the Quint. It will need to be replaced within the foreseeable future. But there are vehicles that are older than it. So I'm glad for the context, but when I do statistics, I'm only going out to the end of your 5-year period, just for purposes of looking at the bottom line here. I try to label that clearly, so if I only add up to 2026, I say that. This is the unfiltered request of the departments. So, you know, I think there are differences in philosophy. Sometimes it's worthwhile using 2 or 3 sentences to put them on the table so people know, just for transparency's sake. When it comes to operating budgets, my interpretation of the Town Administrator Act, and it's actually the act that creates the Town Administrator position and the Finance Director position. Gene and I are given a charge, and that is to present the town with a balanced operating budget. And we do that with extensive interviews of department heads, and we go through all this. By the time we get to the Board of Selectmen and they review and approve it, you know, I think it's obvious that I get visibly impatient with efforts to go back and revisit it, because very little of our budget changes. We have a lot of the same personnel, we're occupying the same buildings, driving the same vehicles. So getting to the 11th hour and trying to present aspirational budgets, in my opinion, is not helpful through the process of preparing for town meeting. I take a very different approach as the town's administrator when it comes to capital. I think that's a place where we need to build consensus. The department heads are your primary resource. They're the experts that you hire to run these departments. They're asking you for the tools that they need to accomplish their mission. And my role is only to try to present questions and other thoughts strategically to the town as you structure your finances. And as between the capital committee, the board of selectmen, and the finance committee, hopefully there'll be shared values and understanding of the situation so that going into town meeting, when this article comes up, everybody's pretty much on board with it. There'll always be some dissent from different decisions, but hopefully the majority of all three boards will be on the same page. So to that end, I don't inject myself into a whole lot of extra editing. You know, there are a couple of numbers here which I think might be low, a couple of might be high, but for the most part, you know, I think these estimated costs were done with some rigor by the department heads and the requesters. And, you know, I've got a memo here that flags a couple of what I think the major considerations are for the town's overall financial health. And I'd rather spend about 5-6 minutes going through that, and you can read it on your own time in detail. Just a couple of things before we get to that memo. I get the sense from conversations I've had that in the past, the school department didn't even bother coming through the capital process. There was no money for capital, and to the extent that they needed it, they would try to get it out of their own budget. And really, since maybe a year before I started, or maybe when I started, there was more of an open conversation about capital. I value that. I think that's important because the town is the ultimate owners of the capital of the school department. And to the extent that there was this so-called gentleman's agreement in the past where 70 cents of every dollar would just go to the schools, and that was the way revenue was divvied up, I think I've made it clear. I think that's hogwash. You should never bind yourself in that way to such a silly thing. Rather, you should look at what their operational needs are together with what you own, the buildings and the vehicles, and making sure they don't neglect those things. You can accomplish that by approving a specific project and maintaining control over the dollars. Ultimately, they might actually still be getting 70 cents of every dollar that comes in, but you're directing some of it to protect the assets that you ultimately own as a taxpayer. I think that's a better way to do it. The school was initially a little bit reluctant to put priorities in years, but they came through, I think, with some pretty crisp decisions that are, there's clearly a theme, and it's a defensible theme. So I'm glad they're participating in the process in this way. So with no additional, Shirley, I sent you this memo about 10 minutes ago. Actually, I sent, what's that? Well, it's,
Her IT person is missing.
but I'm going to talk to it, and I don't know that I'm asking for the committee to make any decisions. I just want to flag a couple of really significant issues. The first, Mr. Chairman, and I'm going to summarize 4 pages, and I think about 4 or 5 paragraphs.
Page 2.
I'm starting at page 1, but first and foremost, you were given a copy of the pavement management study. And we have to look at those budget forecasts from the pavement management study in combination with this. I would argue it should be on the same spreadsheet, but we haven't quite gotten full consensus behind that yet. I know the Board of Selectmen was very supportive of trying to move forward with a roadway plan, but just in the back of our minds, if our only goal is to maintain the roads in the condition that we have now, and we're going to maintain our buildings and our service delivery formula at the exact same level as we have right now, the exposure of the town on an annual basis is about $2.25 million. With about 900,000 of that being roads, and the rest just being the pace of spending for capital to maintain your existing base. So that's heady stuff, because that's far more resources than we have, ultimately. So there's work to be done. The director's list will need to be tweaked, pared down, efficiencies discovered, alternative sources of funding, whether it be grants, primarily going to be grants, identified and pursued, because ultimately we can't spend at that pace for capital at $2.25 million a year. That would be a very different town. If we had that much money coming in that we could allocate to capital, our operational budget would probably be short, because we would need that many more people to deliver the services.
On that 2.2 million, and that's just for the roads, correct?
No, that's about,
Or just
in the pavement management study, if we wanted to maintain the same aggregate total rating for all the roads taken as a group,
Yeah.
we would still have to spend 1.26 million a year for the next 10 years.
That's just repairing the roads, or is that replacing any?
But that's going to take you to some,
Combination.
Yeah.
The reason why I added that is you have a pretty extensive list from the water department
yeah,
on upgrades.
haven't even,
No,
not even talking about it.
Well, you need to consider that, because why would you pave a road that you didn't put a new water line in yet? So,
But
Oh,
there are
that's-
roads-
yeah.
There are roads with no water that are in desperate need of repair.
yep, no.
Yeah. I guess I
Bringing
should,
that up just so
Yeah.
that we're acknowledging.
Bob and I have had discussions, and we're working on that right now.
I don't have water and sewer on this spreadsheet.
Yeah.
My hope is that we won't get there, that the enterprise fund needs to identify resources, and if to the extent that we're talking about economic development, we need to identify grant opportunities to do the major projects that water and wastewater need. My recommendation to the FinCom is that the Finance Committee, have to remember that it is their role to oversee all those departments that the Board of Selectmen don't, and that I don't. That includes the Water Department, and to a great extent, the School Department, and the enterprise portion of the Board of Health operations. Both the Board of Health and the Water Department regularly spend retained earnings every year just to maintain their operation. Retained earnings would typically be the source for capital reinvestment in their systems or in their ongoing landfill operation and the haulage. So I'm not going to stick my finger in anybody's eye. I think FinCom needs to stick their finger in and to engage in an inquiry in what is the plan going forward. It's very nice to be able to say we've had no rate increases, or we haven't increased the price of a sticker. But at the end of the day, if the service provider keeps getting more and more expensive, and it has significant assets under the ground, some of those pipes are 40, 50, 60 or older, years older, you can't neglect the fact that you need to come up with the financing. And you shouldn't look to the taxpayer of the town, with 70% of the town's not on water. If you get to the point where the general fund is subsidizing the enterprise fund, anybody rating our bonds is going to say, well, that's not healthy, because you're going to get sucked into this vortex, because God knows the water projects are all $750,000 a pop. And if we start looking at those and peeling them back, there's probably $6-7 million worth of work we could do in the next 3 or 4 years. No problem, we could spend that much money. So that's why I didn't include them. The next point I'd like to make is this. It runs from page 2 to the top of page 3. I would characterize the town's building assets as an untenable balance of extensive real estate property holdings with old buildings, and our existing buildings don't fully function to support the operations that they support. They're either being underutilized or there's not enough room. So we have, and this is a problem, and this is probably a result of your budget difficulties for however long from the 2009 recession, maybe before that, up until about 27, until the override. All those years went by, and all of this situation just continued to metastasize, it continued to develop. So, just to put a fine point on it, you have a highway department looking to reinvest at this point to replace old trucks. The building isn't, in many cases, not even tall enough for the trucks to easily fit through the doorways and to be parked inside. And we have fairly expensive equipment being stored outside, which inevitably reduces their useful life and causes other maintenance and repair issues. And alongside that fact, and the police department is a small workspace, the fire station was built for a call department, we're now a full-time department with some issues to address. And then this building, which is the best building in town, by far, this is the best building in town, but we only use half of it. You put that alongside with the fact that we have the old fire station, the Veterans Hall, which I call the older of the two grammar schools, the old grammar school on Gleason, and a whole bunch of vacant properties that we insure. In some cases, we try to maintain, but we don't use at all. There's just too much of an imbalance there, and it would be nice if there was a market for some of these properties, but frankly, there isn't. And it would be best, my recommendation to Capital and to the Selectmen and to the FinCom is this, that it's push comes to shove, you identify the assets you want to defend because they're historically critical to the town. And if some of those older buildings are starting to fall down and present an attractive nuisance or other potential liability, they need to be removed. You might reuse the property, you might be able to sell the property to an abutter, but you've got to think it through because we can't keep going like this because the old stuff just keeps getting older and closer to falling down. The biggest concern would be there on Main Street with the really old grammar school next to the abandoned house. We've done all the asbestos workup on those, and we have a demo estimate on the house. We have there's a recreational field behind that for soccer. Deeper in, it's John's Pit. The cemetery is the cemetery a direct abutter? And I don't know what their capacity plan is there and how much more room.
They've got a lot of room to grow right
They have a lot of room to grow, so they don't really need this, but we could use parking, bathroom facility, a storage facility. There's a million things we could use this property for. We can't, as long as those buildings are sitting there. This is a conversation the town really needs to have sooner rather than later. I think Adam's last report on the old fire tower on Cottage Street is that, you push it in the right direction, the whole thing's just going to go. And we had a few miscreants break into the building last year, and they were more interested in playing with the vehicles inside. But it's concerning that it's difficult to secure, but we need the storage. I don't know. We have, I don't know what value you put on the antique fire truck, but we have boats and trailers and UTVs and other things that are stored in there to preserve them. So we can't demolish the building without a solution for the storage of those vehicles. That's my point on buildings. And my point on vehicles is only, the last two municipalities I've worked for, their fleet was in much worse shape than Douglas. But that's a bankrupt city and a town that won't spend money to even for safety purposes. So I don't know if the comparison's fair. But in my opinion, progress has been made. I mean, John's been able to replace a couple of trucks. You've got 2 brand-new ambulances. Your police cruiser fleet is fully up to date. So it's not a disaster, but even some of those department heads that had access to a vehicle in the past don't, and they're really busy on town business. And it's getting a little bit uncomfortable from the insurance point of view. For instance, the building official, we're about to hire a building official, probably somewhere between 30 and 40 inspections a week. And if they're doing that in their private vehicle, they're fair in town business. They're on our insurance liability, not their own. And the chief's cruiser is getting older. Adam's truck, in my opinion, the building facilities manager's truck is actually getting to the point where it's pathetic.
It was over when you got it.
The fenders are rotted out.
Might be a fix 6 years ago.
Yeah. And So I think we need to pay some attention. Now, I like the idea of trying to look at the entire fleet and trying to solve more than one problem if I can with one vehicle. That's easier said than done. You know, it has to be in the right place at the right time, under the control of the right operator. So there is some crossover with Adam Furno being on a call firefighter and the highway foreman. But that's an operational question for the two department heads and whether they're comfortable with whether that arrangement will work for them. Long range, I would really like to be on the basis of buying virtually every single ambulance for the town, cash out of the ambulance fund. There's enough money in there now to buy an ambulance. I don't know how long it took to accrue that balance. Probably about the life of an ambulance, 6 or 7 years. Because you're taking away from it at fall town meeting to supplement your salary lines. But doing that would take $500,000 off of this capital plan going into the future. If we manage it right,
That was always the goal, is to
Yeah.
take our ambulances out of that fund.
and I think we're close. You know, the chief has done a lot of work in raising our rates to be competitive and to raise enough revenue, because at one point you weren't taking in very much. We can sharpen our pencil a little bit on the receivable. I don't know how much we'll get out of it. At a minimum, we'll clean up the balance sheet. But that's a primary source of consolidation, in my opinion. And then lastly, it's a recommendation that this committee and Board of Selectmen, FinCom, engage with each department head to think through, just go back over what is mission critical. You know, how many roads are we plowing? You know, how long does it take to drive a route? How many miles per route? Are we sized properly? Feel comfortable with what we got? Are the things that we need to do the job maybe more cost effectively? I think ultimately, at the end of the day, any conversation about trying to stretch out the life of our vehicle assets begs the question of where are we storing them? Are we taking proper care of them? So with that said, that's my 2 cents on this capital list, and I turn it all over to you. I mean, Gene and I can do as much analysis as you'd like us to do. But this is a committee process, not being driven by me and Gene, but supported by me and Gene.
No, but we'll need input from Gene in order to figure out where the funding's gonna come from, obviously. And the other thing is, we have 5 items that we slid forward, approximately 5 items. But we have many more on here, so now we gotta figure out from these department heads as to how we're gonna either move these ones or keep them on the list that was on there. I don't think that we're in a position that we have the $2.4 million to do all the capital items there.
But you don't have it,
No.
so that's,
So we're gonna need input from Gene as to what we're gonna have for a funding source, how much that's gonna be, and then try to prioritize these particular items that we need to do. So we had talked about in the fall about the generator, that's a problem for this particular building. That's on the list now. We're just gonna have to dig in and figure out what is absolutely needed. I've seen multiple things on these different lists. This month alone, we got, on the December 2nd, we got a spreadsheet, December 15th, we got a spreadsheet, December 23rd, we got a spreadsheet, and they vary a little bit. So I haven't had, this one just came in today, so I haven't had the opportunity to sit there and look at it and see what's actually changed.
well, I think perhaps the biggest difference is engine 1. Now, it's been on the request list for a few years now. But last year, I think we put it off to this year, so we didn't actually engage the conversation. I also think that the more recent conversation about the structural integrity of the vehicle is new information. I would encourage the committee to do site visits and to look at things and,
What's the manufacturer of that particular engine?
what's that?
Yes.
Pierce? Did you see this article that was in?
About Smithfield, yeah.
And I wouldn't buy a Pierce. I didn't buy a Pierce last
Yeah.
time.
But did you read that article that was in?
Yeah.
That particular town, what they
Is
did?
that
is they-
Smithfield?
Yeah.
Yeah.
They turned around and ended up in Maine, they bought a truck that was in exceptional condition for $120,000. It's an old machine, obviously. And I'm not suggesting that that's the route that we're gonna go, it's
Yeah.
just, it was interesting to see this. I stopped in to get a sandwich, seen the free paper, and I'm like, fire truck, 750,000, so I took it and read it while I was eating, and just kept it, so I could, in case nobody's seen it,
Yeah.
share that with.
I know people will latch on to the fact that the chief in Smithfield managed to strike gold. It's like a blind squirrel, he found a nut. These trucks, the real crux of that story, the takeaway from that story is that Pierce manufactured a $1.2 million aerial truck that rotted out in 10 years.
Yeah.
That's the real takeaway.
That's what I took away from it. So I was looking for
Yeah.
the secret prize in the box of Cracker Jacks.
He got super lucky, and
It does
knowing a little bit about what I do about fire trucks, that thing, that one from Maine could die out in the middle of a call.
No, it's
It's just,
fine.
if it's in that good a shape, it means nobody was using it, and did they maintain it?
No,
Did they
but
grease it? Did they
this particular
exercise it?
article actually identifies multiple towns that had a
Yeah, Pierce,
problem
yeah.
with this manufacturer, that the manufacturer declines to stand behind. So
Yeah.
it's important that, as a town, that we recognize the fact that this company's not standing behind their product.
Well, that manufacturer, the previous chief bought three trucks from that manufacturer. One of them was on a grant, an AFG grant, which a ladder truck 15 years ago, they got for $500,000. I think that was a tower truck, if I,
That's a tower, it's an
From,
articulated
yeah.
tower with
but in any event,
riggers.
Yep.
I stopped buying Pierce because of their maintenance. The customer service and the maintenance was a joke. So I just stopped buying. I bought from a guy that's in Hopkinton, where they build the trucks in Pennsylvania, but we service them in Hopkinton, and I haven't had any real issues with that. The last truck was bought in 2017.
Are these put on a state bid list?
Yes,
And so the state approved this Pierce
correct.
manufacturer?
Right.
Well, that says a lot.
Well,
You know,
the thing is, all the manufacturers get on the state bid list. FCAM, the Fire Chiefs Association of Massachusetts, has a list, and you can get on that. I don't know what the criteria is to get there, but most of the time, you know, we're not going to buy something that's not on the bid list, because we know it's going to be a lot more expensive. So we just don't do it.
Yeah, sometimes you get what you pay for. It's fascinating. There are, I think Chief Vincent is an exception to the rule. Most of the fire chiefs I've dealt with have really strong loyalties to a specific manufacturer, and you can never budge them off it. The last fire chief I had in Tiverton would never buy anything other than a Horton ambulance. Well, it just happens to be the most expensive ambulance on the planet.
And
they stink.
E1 is where they make Hortons as well.
Yeah.
And they
They
tried
stink.
to sell us a Horton when we bought the ambulance, and I said, why would I buy that when it's done in 5 years? Well, you're buying disposable ambulances. Yours is just as disposable, it just costs more at the end of 5 years, 100,000 more.
Are we going to be getting any of these forms with the narrative in there?
I've got them all. Here's the problem, I don't have a whole lot of support. So I have to sit here and make these things fit on a
I
page.
have to sit in my office in between
Yeah.
everything else I'm doing. and
So I actually, honestly, we need the information that's on some of those forms, but some of it's like, I don't know.
Some of it's redundant. I'm just taking the paragraph or the narrative from last time and tweaking maybe one sentence or whatever and changing the fiscal year number is all that's really happening.
Yeah.
Nothing really changes. Outside of, in this case with this truck, we've identified some structural integrity issues of the truck.
And that's a situation where that form would be helpful for the people on the committee to identify what your concerns are with that.
But,
Looking at this, all right, so I have a fire truck, okay.
I realize you need a narrative, but that goes back to my point. I think it's one thing to see it on a piece of paper, but there are some things that you just have to see, because they're the things that we deal with every day. I can tell you all about the leak in the upstairs bathroom that occurred in the last storm. But if you go up there and you look at the damage it did and what Adam had to do to rectify the situation, you have a better sense of what's really going on than from reading it in the narrative. I can get you those things, but I wanted to get this to you first, because you need the overview to understand what it is you're
Yeah,
parsing.
that's good, but in order for us to try to
Yeah.
condense this list and prioritize the things, I think we need a little bit more, I personally feel.
No, there's no expectation that you would ever look at this and make decisions on the basis of it. You're going to get that stuff.
Yep.
But I just think for purposes of the overview, you can see, I mean, just in 1 year, you've got however many projects this is going to come up to. There's 13, 17. You get enough work right there with 26 projects requested for 2022. So ultimately, I mean, that's the first thing I want to get in your hands is what the department heads asked for in this year, because they're urgent time-wise.
Right, so if you have 26 line items, you're not going to get 26 line items done in the first fiscal year, but we have a 5-year plan in order to put together. But that also affects all this other stuff that was on the 5-year plan to start with.
It just bumps everything down the road.
Yeah, no, everything's going to move.
Part of that,
I think it'd be helpful for everybody to, I agree with you, to see it is totally different than reading about it on a piece of paper.
the tricky conversation is, just because it was asked for in 2022, let's say it's the department head's number 3 priority.
Yeah.
Their number 1 priority for fiscal '23 might still be more important. So there's, as you adjust, there's that conversation too. You might be pushing down. We try to time things from a funding perspective to prevent chunkiness. It's a lot easier to hit a target for a free cash target if it's smoothed out over the years and we can see what's heading. Again, this is very relevant to capital. It's more of a 50,000-foot view of it, but we are in the process of selling real estate. We signed 1 closing today. Philosophically, the best thing to do with one-time proceeds from the sale of real estate would be to invest it in a long-term asset that's very expensive, because at that point, you've relieved the taxpayer of having to pay all that out using revenues that didn't come from the taxpayer, and it's a good thing. I haven't fully discussed all the details of this with the finance director yet, but it would be good to say, even if you don't take the actual check and put it into a lockbox for a specific project, which Gene will tell you should do and can't do, that you can still do it as a share of mind. You can still say, well, if we sold property for $250,000, we should put at least $250,000 of the free cash that created into the road program. You sold a piece of property, you're going to invest in a road that should last you 30 years or even 50 years. It's a good swap. If we get on a pace
Right.
of selling property, then we'll be funding our road pavement program for the long term.
And where does that money go?
So normally it's an unbudgeted revenue, so it will close to the general fund as free cash.
Okay, so, which would have to be spent the following year or something?
No, so Gene always confuses me with this conversation, but if you don't spend it, you carry it over. There is a point in the year at which you can't spend it anymore. Your special town meeting in the fall is timed to coincide with these deadlines. So at the end of the year, you have 0 free cash because you've made a decision to roll it over to the next year or to spend it in the year you're in. So I think the layperson's understanding of this is, if you don't spend it, you roll it over to the next year, unless you go to town meeting and ask for it to go to stabilization, which you could do that too, it's just harder to get it
Could you
out.
go to town and then want to use this fire truck for argument's sake? Say you got $200,000 for a piece of land somewhere. Could you go to town meeting and appropriate, and get that money appropriated towards his new fire truck that may happen 2026?
Directly, I think that's where, what I just mentioned, I think the finance director would resist that, because that's a sort of an earmark almost. What she would say, the proper way to think of it is, it created a source of free cash. So put it in the capital budget and have the capital committee request that free cash for that purpose, right? So it would affect your capital budget, right?
I'm just curious if,
But I just think that,
because like we have all this, we just did the radio project, we had $160,000
Yeah.
left over from these other projects. The fire alarm that's in this building, we got about 100,000 sitting in that one. I didn't know if you could do the similar thing, if in fact that's what you're thinking for the large expenses. If you could appropriate that money at town meeting for that particular expense, but if the finance committee doesn't do it that way, I guess they don't do it that way.
yeah, I mean, it's,
It just makes logical sense to me that if it's like putting money in different envelopes.
yeah, if you have a predictable source, you might want to have that conversation about how could you do it.
Yeah,
And so that's not really a conversation about the sale of real estate, that's a one-time transaction. And it's unpredictable. We don't know how much real estate will sell going forward.
correct.
We have a strange conversation going on with DLS, the Division of Local Services at the Department of Revenue right now, about cannabis, and whether or not we can recognize cannabis proceeds before we realize them. So in other words, can we count on the projected numbers from our host community agreements from year to year? And their answer so far has been, no, don't put it in your recap. Don't put it in your revenue projection. Because if the business isn't even operating yet and hasn't made your payments, you don't know that they're going to do that. So it's not a reliable source of revenue. If you get it, good for you. If you don't, then what that does for this year's budget means we had to have a conversation about miscellaneous town receipts and the motor vehicle excise in particular, and whether or not there was room there, because we're very conservative with our revenue estimates, where there was room to absorb the 140,000 or so that we expect to get from cannabis, but now can't count. The reality is that particular cannabis business is doing crazy good, and I fully expect that 140 grand to come in. Again, it would be a question of, right now, it will close to free cash. It's an unbudgeted revenue. It's a revenue above and beyond what we expected, so we didn't spend anything against it. Is that a viable source for roads? If you think about it, if the economy tanks to the point where we can't sell real estate and nobody's buying pot, well, the road's not going to collapse if you don't fix it this year versus next year. Maybe, if it's that bad, it's that bad, but none of our roads in this town are that bad. So if you skip a year, it's not the end of the world, because your funding resource didn't come through for you. It's food for thought. Again, it would have to be a consensus between your three boards as to how you want to finance these long-term projects and whether that's an appropriate way to look at it. You can tell, I think it is, because cannabis is big dollars. It is also, really depends. Is the business open? Is it not open? Hey, Tim.
I mean, to interrupt, just want to wish everyone a Merry Christmas.
Yeah, you too.
Merry Christmas, Selectman. So that's a realistic way of trying to prime the pump for really long-lived assets. And that allows you to kind of corral your free cash for these projects on this spreadsheet that need to be taken care of.
So you don't anticipate any new information coming in
No,
on this?
no, this is
We got
done.
everything
This
from the
is,
school, and you said water's not on here.
I'm not going to put water on here. I just, look, I
Because they
think
don't have anything that's pressing over the next 5 years?
they've got plenty. But I think they always rate high and then we never fund them. So I think the way this is really going to work with their projects is if we have an economic development project that will be supported by a state grant in some way or shape or form. At that point, we would either have to have a special town meeting or come back to annual town meeting and ask for that as a package. Would the town be willing to put up 50% to do this water project? But at the end of the day, that enterprise fund is supposed to sustain itself. And there's a bigger conversation about whether or not the vision is for how long that thing is going to go. Right now, we're using a fair amount for operations, so.
And there's no danger in not recognizing their projects on a.
If they want to come forward, if they want to come forward, they can come forward. I guess,
No, but at the beginning of the meeting, you said some lines are 60, 70, whatever years old. Is there anything that we should be concerned about?
you don't know. I mean, I'm looking at John because he's the one who's got to get in the hole every time a pipe breaks.
I mean, there's a lot of, the line on Main Street from downtown up towards the highway bound. We had 5 or 6 breaks in that one year we had all that snow in
Yeah.
14, 15. That's an old line as well.
Yeah.
So I'm sure there's tons that they need to do. You know, the one we just did the length of Cemetery Street in-house.
Yeah.
We spent maybe $30,000. If we subbed that out, what we figured out would have been $250,000.
Right.
And that line was put in, we found a valve, 1909. One of the valves in the ground was stamped. So there's plenty of water lines that need to be replaced in town.
Yeah. And I'm not trying to add them onto the list, I'm just asking the question, just so we don't paint ourselves into a corner. Like, you're finally making some headway after the override and stuff, where potentially you could keep the ambulance funds in an account that they could actually be used for what they were intended, instead of trying to supplement operational costs. All right, so I guess the next thing is we'll get some of these narrative sheets.
Get some of the sheets, I think, in order to kind of push the conversation, I would say specifically put that department, a department or a couple of departments on your agenda and ask them to be prepared to present their narrative and discuss it.
I thought you wanted to visit them.
You do.
Well, we're going to do that at the same time. We're not just going to go around and visiting everybody. They're going to need to come in and present their case, whether it's Kent with his fire truck, then we're going to need, if it's, he's saying things falling apart, rot it out. Matt's suggestion is we go look at it and so you can really understand what's going on with that truck. What I would like to do is get some of the information ahead of time. Getting it on the day of the meeting does me personally no good at all, because I don't have time to sit there and look at it and go through it. I'm just looking at these and I'm like, okay, so now we got a truck on the building thing where.
Again, I appreciate it, but I'm going to say for the last time, the conversation today was about this list. That's what we said we were going to do. We're going to finalize this list. Because to get a whole lot more ready for this meeting is just, I also need, like I say, it's a water balloon. So we've got pandemic, we've got storms, we've got all this other stuff. So to the extent that you want something specific, it was more helpful to answer specific questions than it is to print out however many projects this is. To sit at my desk and pull out 70 or 80 projects at 3 pages each. It's a 240-page book. And half of the stuff isn't even going to make it to your consideration because it's too far in the future, or as it doesn't have a good estimate next to it. So like I say, set your agenda, set what you want to talk about, a specific department or a couple of projects. And that way we'll get you the narrative that's already been submitted, but pictures and site visit and all the other stuff that you might need to support your deliberations. We absolutely don't have the staff to provide everybody with a budget book and a 240-page capital book. When we start doing that stuff, the day-to-day things fall apart.
Brandon needs to get downstairs.
Yeah.
About 5 minutes past due, so let him escape. We'll send out an email, we'll figure out what the next meeting date is, Brandon.
Okay.
And then just send you an email, you'll be
Yeah.
included on the email.
Okay.
If you don't mind that.
Oh, no.
Because I think we're pretty much past that discussion anyways.
Yeah, I
Ken
should be
needs to
available.
leave at 3 o'clock.
I have a question, I think we've asked it before, but for these two old buildings on the old elementary school on Main Street and the 19 Main Street house, can the fire department use that as a training area for burning them down or something?
The one on Gleason Court, we still use from time to time. We go in and train inside that building. You talk about 19 Main,
Yeah,
the,
19 Main.
I'm talking about the-
Yeah.
I call
We
it
can't
old
burn 19 Main.
you can't burn 19 Main, it's too close to the road. It would,
Well, how
full of
about the
it's full of
VFW
asbestos.
next door?
you couldn't burn either one of them. You have to get special permits from the state because all the shingles are it puts up all these pollutants and
Yeah,
carcinogens in the air and
it'll
stuff like
start an
that.
environmental concern with the wetlands
Yeah.
that's right next to the VFW and stuff.
And obviously
You're
we
not
would flow
saving-
water and all that would mix in with that type
Yeah.
stuff too, so.
Correct.
And quite honestly, from a safety perspective, burning old buildings is very dangerous to firefighters. We try to burn in buildings that are certified for that type of thing. They're more concrete and
Somebody doesn't
slab.
go in and crash through the floor.
You know, I just remember reading an article after we had discussed it, I think, here, several years ago, and it happened in Holden, that they did burn, the town...
We've burned them in here, but it's 20 years ago and times have changed.
No, this was like 2 or 3 years ago. It
Oh, yeah?
wasn't,
I don't-
20 years.
No, it's still done, but you have to be choosy about it. The 19 Main is an absolute no-go because that's full of asbestos. We need to remediate that building. We can't lawfully make that friable.
You would
The
spend a lot of
VFW
time doing adjustments to
Yeah.
make the building safe, and it's not prudent.
The VFW, I think, has structural integrity issues, so you're really playing with a dangerous situation there because that foundation isn't rock solid all the way to the back.
We would like to meet on the 6th or the 13th.
Well, if you don't mind, Mr. Chairman, in January, if you want to meet more often than not, so you can push our work along,
Yep,
that helps us budget our time.
right.
And that gives me enough lead time to be prepared at the level that you want for that first meeting in
I'm just trying
January.
to be fair to everybody on the committee.
I think that first week of January is going to be jammed with things that didn't get done right before the holidays started. But the second week of January, starting that second week, if your committee wants to, we'll try to go, we could go every week, just to bring this to a conclusion. So,
Okay, so is everybody available for the 13th?
is that a Wednesday?
Yes.
I think personnel, believe it or not, is meeting on that day, but remotely.
You'll meet remotely?
Well, yeah, and
that's fine.
there's only 3 members.
Yep.
So I have to go to that one.
Shirley, you good for the 13th of January?
I'm checking, hold on.
Hurry up. You guys good? Yeah.
Unless it's snowing.
Sounds good. 2
Yeah.
o'clock?
Yes, barring any snow events or emergencies.
Sure.
If anybody has any questions or that you need something specific on the spreadsheet that Matt's given us, email me and I'll ask Matt to get it for us. We have to be careful of violating the open meeting law.
So, just so we all understand how we can navigate that,
Yeah,
anybody can ask me or Gene any question. Ask the question to the whole email distribution list so that everybody knows you asked.
okay.
And then we are allowed to report back to you as long as we distribute to everyone. What you cannot do is deliberate. You can't have a discussion
Okay.
all right?
That's fine.
But if you say, hey, how many lug nuts are on engine one?
Yeah.
Gene and I can say, oh, yeah, there's 56 lug nuts, and then that's the information. And then when you have your meeting, you discuss what that ramifications of that are.
Okay.
That's fine, and it's much more efficient than waiting to ask your question to another meeting, because then you're just pushing everything out.
And
into
that's
the
why I
future.
brought up the subject.
Yeah.
Is just to try to expedite it. I don't want to keep coming here and just looking at spreadsheets and talking in vague terms.
So is the plan to bring a department head, departments that head in next time?
Do you want to?
We can figure out which ones we want to bring
We
in.
want to start streamlining just so we can make progress.
If you want, my suggestion would be that you have Adam Furno here, and we talk about the buildings
Yeah?
from the
We
outset.
can do highway at the same time if you want.
And we can do fire the same day if you want. You hit,
How much time
Yeah,
you want.
so why don't we all look at the list that Matt gave us today, and then email into Matt and with the suggestion as to which department heads, and we'll have a consensus from everybody, and we'll get those in. And you're probably right on point with Adam, John, and Kent, which is, it's easy because these guys are already here.
True, I think Adam and John might be able to go at the same time, plus they both work at Highway. I think the fire department is a discrete conversation, I really do. I think it would be best to meet at the fire station that day,
Yeah.
look at the station, look at the equipment, and just be able to see how the operation runs a little bit, as opposed to being here and talking about it in theoretical terms. I don't know how many people have been in the fire station, or when the last time was that you were in the fire station. It would be helpful to see it. Do you agree, chief?
yeah, I do.
So whatever it is that we're gonna look at. the
I
fire
think if we
station,
do-
I would like to see the narratives on that.
I'm going to pencil in building and highway for next time. We'll have all those narratives.
Yeah.
Hopefully I can get them out. That I can do fairly quickly.
So are we doing just the
Just the 2022, yeah.
Yeah.
I can send you my narratives.
Yeah.
I don't have.
Yours are okay, because you're using a more up-to-date version of Word. I don't want to get into the technical weeds,
Yeah.
but they're all, the older versions of the software generate a document that is hard for me to work with, so I have to completely reconfigure it. So every single time I open a new document, I spend 10, 15 minutes fixing it, not with, because he's got the new stuff, so.
So what I sent you didn't help you.
It does help me, but it's just a challenge to print it out, and then I can't, we need a new form. Long story short, at the end of the capital process, we need to talk about how information is gathered by the committee and what you really want, and then we'll design a form that they can fill out that's already formatted.
Yeah.
By
Well, we can
Suzanne.
work on that simultaneously.
We could.
Just identify some of the, I'm not saying spend time on it, but
Yeah.
identify it as we're going through, and then by the end of it, we'll be pretty close
Yeah.
as to what we need. So, if anybody,
Janice,
yep, good.
Shirley Mazinski, I do have a request that the information be sent out sooner, prior to the meeting.
Yeah, I think I got that message like 1,000 times. I'm done
Very
answering.
difficult. I have other things I have to do.
And so do I. So I'll do the best I can, folks.
And most
Enough.
of you will work. I
Just let it go
appreciate
through.
that.
God.
And I would request that we have it, show the changes that the
No.
departments are requesting.
Yeah, I will never do that. That is way too much time. I'm going to show you what their final conclusion is and what they're asking for. If I start redlining documents, you have the most expensive secretary on the planet, and I'm not doing that. There is way too much going on in town right now for me to be coloring things red and blue, and no. This is a lot of information. You want more? I know.
That's why I'm just letting you finish.
Killing me.
So, I'll work on that myself, between these spreadsheets that he got, and then I'll do what I can with it.
Thank you.
Anyone else have anything? Motion to adjourn, please.
So moved.
second?
Second,
All right, a motion made by John, seconded by Ellie and Shirley. Roll call vote, please. Ken? Roll
Ken
call.
Vincent,
Yes
John?
or no?
John Furno, aye.
Ellie Chesbro, aye.
Ben Tessino, aye.
Shirley Mazinski, aye.
Mike Fitzpatrick, aye. We are adjourned at 3 PM. Thank you.